Andy and I ran the company for the first 4 years out of a two-bedroom apartment. And by the fourth year, we had 6 employees and they had keys to our two-bedroom apartment.
It keeps facilities costs down.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
we
appreciate that.
completely bootstrapped this company. And
Mm.
because we were vertically integrated, not that we were making fees off, we were buying one-off deals, but like whatever we would make, we would put back into the company and into hiring people and into building an operating platform.
Welcome to another episode of the Matthews Mentality Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Matthews, and today we're joined by a dynamic entrepreneur and inspiring leader in the real estate investment world, my favorite world, close to my heart, Jahan Moslehi. Jahan is the co-founder and CEO of Bridge 33 Capital, a private real estate investment firm with an incredible growth story. He and his co-founder launched the company 12 years ago out of a two-bedroom apartment in Seattle with little money or experience. And today, Bridge 33 has grown into a national powerhouse, managing $2 billion in assets and 15 million square feet of retail properties across the country. In 2024, Bridge 33 was the largest buyer of retail real estate in the U.S. Is this true?
I think it is.
Yeah, look, we're going to speak it into existence.
That's what they tell us.
Closing over 650 million. Yeah, I would say that probably makes you the largest in deals. A testament to the grit, work ethic, and strategic vision that define Jahan's approach. Today, we'll talk about the power of mentorship, the mental fitness it takes to be a co-founder, the story behind Bridge 33's ride. We're going to talk a little bit about Madagascar, maybe even some ayahuasca, yeah?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see about whoa. We'll see
But
about
before
that.
we jump in, be sure to like, subscribe, share this episode with someone who's passionate about entrepreneurship, real estate, retail, or building something great from the ground up. Jahan, welcome to the Matthews Mentality Podcast.
Thanks so much, Kyle. It's great to be here. And I got to tell you, what you've done and what you're building here with this podcast is absolutely amazing. And it's an honor for me to be on the podcast with you.
I appreciate that. The podcast is just a side hustle. We got this big brokerage company. So if you really appreciate me, you'll sell a bunch of assets through the brokerage company. Is that cool? Deal?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to sell some assets to us first, and then we'll. That's how it works, Kyle.
Reciprocity. Is that how it works?
That's how it works,
Man,
Kyle.
I forgot my lessons from brokerage. I had all these listing agreements ready to sign. Zach, where are those listing groups? Just put them to the side. No, yeah. So we appreciate you coming to Nashville. We put on a nice little light show for you last night. Multiple tornado warnings.
Yeah, I got here last night, and from 3 a.m. onwards, every 30 minutes, I was woken up by the warnings. And so I'm a little tired today. That's
Well, you don't look it, you don't show it, but I actually will admit at this point, there were no tornado warnings. This was a psyops by Matthews Real Estate to get you tired, to deteriorate your mental acuity and get you to sign up a bunch of deals with us. So I'm working on it.
Listen, we're buying.
You're buying.
Let's get me some good deals, Kyle, and we're good to go.
It's like every owner in my Kyle, I don't want to sell, I want to buy. I want to buy a good deal.
Is that my accent?
No, that's not your accent. That was
that
the accent of most of the owners. So I started in brokerage, working retail properties in West LA. And so most of the owners were immigrants like yourself. We're going to talk about your immigrant story. And so the accents, like it's seared into my head. Like I want to buy 8 cap in Beverly Hills. And I was like, well, shit, so do I. But all right, so let's talk about how actually let's start with talk to us about Bridge 33. Let's not assume the audience knows. Tell us about Bridge 33. What do you guys own? What are you buying?
Yeah.
Just what does the company look like today?
So Bridge 33 is actually such an improbable story. It really was a pie in the sky sort of dream at entrepreneurship that should never have worked. My co-founder and I, Andy Chen, who was my best friend from college.
Who's your best friend? By default, he was your only friend. Is this true?
Well, no, I had a lot of friends.
Okay.
I was actually cool at the University of Chicago. I know that's where fun goes to die, but
I was your best friend from college, Andy Chen.
Yeah. So he was a medical doctor, career switch into investment banking. And I had spent a whole bunch of years at Morgan Stanley. And really what the inspiration behind Bridge 33 was the following. I spent 7 years at Morgan Stanley doing CMBS up until 2008. I was then super lucky. In 2007, I applied to business school and I applied to Stanford. Luckily got in. And by the way, a lot of people are like, "Oh, you timed that perfectly. Did you know that we were about to have the GFC?"
I was going to ask, was that the driver?
And I mean, the market was getting a little slow in '07, and I thought, this would be a good time to like take a little break, maybe slow things down, go back to school. I really wanted to live in California, and so I ended up applying, and then literally everything came crashing down around me. So I was very lucky with my timing. I started at Stanford in 2008. And Stanford was really impactful for two reasons. One, they pound entrepreneurship into your head. So no one cares about investment banking, Morgan Stanley, consulting, even real estate. It's really all about entrepreneurship. And so that's where I got the entrepreneurial bug. And then two, I became really close to two mentors, Hamid Moghadam and Doug Abbey. And Hamid and Doug were the co-founders of A&B, which is now Prologis. Hamid is the CEO chairman of Prologis, big Stanford trustee. And Doug teaches the only real estate class at Stanford Business School. Because
Mhm.
again, nobody at Stanford really cares about real estate. And Hamid and Doug were the inspiration behind Bridge 33. I actually ended up going back to Morgan Stanley for a little bit. And in 2012, I said, okay, this is it. It's now or never. I'm going to try to start a company now. And it's probably not going to work. I called Andy and I asked him to essentially move to Seattle with me to start this company. I called Hamid and Doug, asked if they would back me. They both said yes. And so Andy and I get to Seattle in 2012, rent a two-bedroom apartment. And our idea was that I'd worked all these years in CMBS, and we had obviously securitized a lot of loans before the financial crisis, and all these loans had essentially gone bad. And the idea was maybe there's a way that we can, buy some small deals from these CMBS special servicers. So about 11 and a half years ago, we got our first deal. It
What
was
was
on
it?
it was in Everett, Washington, which is not in it's about 25 minutes north of Seattle. We got 20 investors to give us 2.75 million. So it was like Hamid, Doug, my parents put in, who are immigrants and not high net worth, put in 50 grand. My old boss is from Morgan Stanley, but we got 20 investors to give us 2.75 million. And we bought a little 19,000 square foot strip center in Everett, Washington that was only 30% leased. And it's actually the first story is a fascinating story. So the biggest vacancy was an 8,000 square foot vacant restaurant building that everybody told us was unleasable.
Was it out parcel, like NPAD,
It
corner?
was a standalone building, but it was set in the back,
Yeah,
and then it was an 8,000 square
it's a
foot
big one.
vacant restaurant. So as you would know, 8,000 square feet. Very few operators can operate out of 8,000 square feet, especially if it's in the back.
The back.
And then it was an 11,000 square foot strip building that had a 3,300 square foot elbow space that was vacant. And of course, that's
That's really
the,
brutal.
visibility, frontage parking. And then there was an end cap as well. And the crazy part about this, Kyle, is everyone told us the restaurant space was unleasable. On the day we closed the deal, there was an abandoned minivan with needles inside. This is not a nice area. Vagrants, homeless, drug issue. And so we called the tow truck company on the day that we closed the deals. We didn't have any brokers. It was literally like we're just wrapping our heads around like how to buy a piece of real estate. And the tow truck driver shows up. His name is Ralph, and I just start chatting with him. And he ends up giving me the lead on who to reach out to. He's like, "Oh man, you should put a Jimmy Max Roadhouse in there. I have to drive once a week with my wife down to Renton. Do you know how much traffic there is?" And so I literally Googled Jimmy Max Roadhouse, and I see they have two locations in South Puget Sound. And that night, we like send a cold email, "Hey, we're just a couple of guys. We bought our first real estate deal." And that email essentially kicked off 6 weeks later. We had a 15-year lease signed with Jimmy Max Roadhouse.
Wow.
Metro PCS was expanding rapidly at the time. They called us out of the blue the second week and were like, "We want to be in the end cap." And then we put a dentist into the elbow
Yeah, I was gonna say
space.
the elbow is typically almost more of an off like professional service.
Exactly.
And so it's so easy. It was that easy.
So within,
Yeah.
this is where the luck comes
Yeah.
in. But uh, unbelievable, right? This people were going to give us money once. And I actually later on, I asked some of the investors, I was like, "Why would you give us money? We've never raised money. We've never bought real estate. We know nothing about retail. We know nothing about leasing." And pretty much the consensus from a few of them was, "Well, we knew you weren't going to steal from us. We knew you were going to work really hard, and we wanted to see you succeed. And oh, by the way, we were going to give you money once. But this wasn't like a repeat kind of thing. So if it took 2 years for us to figure out like what to do with the restaurant space, I'm actually convinced that I wouldn't be sitting here. Bridge
Interesting.
33 would not exist. Um,
Did you immediately like refinance return capital as kind of
yeah,
proof of
so we
concept?
had bought it all cash for
Mhm.
2.75 million. Once all the leases were signed and the tenants moved in, it was worth 5 million. So we took out a 3.2 million dollar loan,
Yeah.
and our investors got all their money back within 6 months plus some.
Plus some.
Except we
Plus they still have their basis in the property.
still own the property.
Yeah.
So everyone thinks we're geniuses, which meant that we had money to buy the second deal, and that
Mhm.
was 6 million, and it was 40 investors, and it was all sort of word of mouth. So anyway, so over time, I'd say the first 7 years, we only bought from CMBS servicers. That was our secret sauce. Like we knew the
You said, "Hey,
servicers.
I used to be in this world. I know which ones are the bad ones. Like, let's go buy this one."
Or you know what I would say, Kyle? It's a lot of people raised money thinking that it was the RTC days all over again. They were going to buy all this stuff. It turns out the CMBS space is a very opaque industry,
Yeah.
and it's all about relationships. So if you don't have the relationships to source those deals, and the one thing we did have was we had those relationships.
Who was that? Was that C3, CW, like
Yeah, we essentially
LNR?
bought from
Yeah.
three sellers: LNR, CW, C3.
Yeah.
But what's also is the bondholders that sometimes were in control positions had a lot of power as to who they would sell it to.
Interesting.
So, and I would often say if you didn't work in the industry, it was very hard to break into that industry.
Yeah.
So we cut our teeth essentially, after the first two deals, we bought 5 deals in Las Vegas between 2014 and 2016. And that was terrific buys because then Vegas became super hot and we could
Sure.
never buy afterwards.
Why retail?
So, it was probably like chance. The first deal that we bought was retail.
So you didn't have a business plan in writing, say we're targeting retail properties. It wasn't necessarily
No,
retail.
it was distressed CMBS.
Okay.
Then once we started buying a few retail properties, then we started developing expertise in
Okay.
retail. And then we just started focusing on sort of retail.
Understood.
We did that for about 7 years. And then we raised our first fund, by the way, in 2017. That was 66 million, all high net worth. And we raised our second fund in 2020. That was 220 million. So the fund started getting a little bit bigger. And then COVID hit. And for
Mhm.
about, I'd say 60 days, like all of us probably in the industry, I thought, oh, shoot, I just lost everybody's money. We're screwed. But then you remember a lot of the stuff that was in CMBS was in secondary and tertiary markets. It was properties that were not that sexy. It was kind of like, everyday essential kind of
Yeah,
tenants.
essential businesses. Yeah.
Exactly. And a lot of people left the cities and moved into these secondary and tertiary markets. So we quickly realized because, by the way, we built this company, especially with Hamid and Doug being the key inspiration and mentors and stakeholders in the company. It was very important to me that we built a company that was focused on operations
Mhm.
and operational excellence. So we knew every tenant. We managed, even though we were in 17 states and some like relatively small properties, we were vertically integrated and managed these one-off properties. So we had a good handle on the fact that our tenants were doing really well. And we quickly in 2020 went from defense to offense, bought some interesting debt positions in 2020. And then in 2021 was, I would say, our breakout year. We bought 540 million of real estate. And it was really in the first half of 2021 when there was still a lot of uncertainty around Omicron, COVID, and I think a lot of
Oh
people were
yeah.
still on the sidelines.
Yeah. I was operating a business that year. It was a great year from a volume and a transaction standpoint and a value standpoint, but 2020 was tough. 22 was when it got really tough when the rates really sunk in volume. 23, 24, tough. But like, you're like, well, you had 21, and I look at the numbers from 21. Yeah, that was a great year, but even that was stressful because there was so much uncertainty.
Uncertainty,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
It was crazy.
yeah.
What does Bridge 33 mean?
So I'm originally Persian from Iran,
Okay.
and it's actually named after a historic bridge in a city called Isfahan called the 33 Bridge. It's a UNESCO protected bridge from like 600 years ago. Got 33 arches. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful bridge. And so that's where the name comes from. And I gotta say, every other name that Andy and I thought of was taken,
Yeah.
like Green Hill
Green
or
Oak,
like Green
Stone.
Oak or Stone
Yeah.
or whatever. So we
Essential
thought,
retail. Oh, you weren't even a retail to start, but no,
Yeah.
it's a great. That's interesting. I would not have guessed that. I figured it was some play on bridges in the U.S. or somewhere
Yeah.
near in Seattle where you were founded. But all right. So you're born in Iran. What year?
I was born in 1978.
78. So a lot going on around that period of time. A
Yeah.
lot of the clients I worked with in Los Angeles growing up in the business were originally from Iran, a big Persian Jewish community. They left 78, 79, kind of as um what was it? The Ayatollah and the
Yep.
Islamic Revolution, and they fled, but you guys didn't leave for what, 6, 7 years after that period. It
Yeah,
was
we couldn't get out till 85, and it was really
85.
the Iran-Iraq War.
And that was what, 80 to 88?
80 to 88, it
Dude, I
was
was
a
studying this with my son like last week. Kid you not.
really,
Oh yeah. I mean, I
that's
already knew it, just to be clear, but
super
yeah, yeah,
impressive.
yeah.
Yeah, but it was a brutal 8-year
It was not
war.
good.
1.2 million people died on both sides, but and I actually remember as a kid.
The Soviets were back in Iran and the Americans were back in Saddam, right?
It's
From a
fortunately, I
weapons
think
standpoint.
it was more complicated than that. I think we were publicly backing Iraq, but then we were selling arms to Iran through the Iran-Contra
Oh,
affair.
Iran-Contra,
It's
yeah.
a
It
very
was
I
very it
mean,
was
that would
very
be a
bad.
whole separate
Yeah,
podcast about the
yeah,
complexities of,
yeah.
but it was, let's just say the Islamic Revolution was, I mean, I'm stating the obvious, not a good thing. The people that could get out got out in 78, 79. We didn't get out till 85, and it was really the war. I mean, I have memories of sirens and
Yeah,
running to the
tell me what
basement.
if like have you ever spent time to kind of reflect on that period of life? I mean, very young, you're 5, 6, 7 years old, and you're hearing sirens, and I don't know if it's a bomb shelter, but were there nights where you're like, or maybe you saw your parents, kind of reflect this feeling that hey, we may lose our life if the bomb lands in the wrong
Yeah,
place.
I mean, it was definitely. I think I blocked a lot of the memories out, but I definitely have like at least one memory of sirens and basements and so forth. I think it actually affected my mom quite a bit. And so I have a memory of like we just went to the eastern part of the country and just like stayed in some like village for 2 weeks, right? And then I think we had an opportunity in '85 to come to the U.S., but not all four. So I have one brother and my parents. It was just my mom, my brother, and I. And this is the total immigrant story. We came in September '85. We landed in O'Hare. The only person we knew in the country was my uncle, my dad's brother, who was an electrical engineer for GE, and he lived in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And so he picked us up. And then for a year and a half, he had a 2-bedroom apartment, 1 bathroom,
Just outside Milwaukee.
just outside of Milwaukee. He was a 35-year-old bachelor, and talk about cramping in style. His brother's wife and 10-year-old and 7-year-old son become his Insta roommates. And so
Sounds
the
like
three of
a
us slept in one
sounds like a
room.
good dude though.
Great dude.
Yeah.
Great dude. I mean, I just think about, what I owe him,
Hmm.
and to my parents. I think people, forget how scary it can be to come to a country. None of us spoke the language, right? I didn't speak a word of English. My mom didn't speak, the language. My dad couldn't get out for 2 more years. So he came in '87 to the U.S. And then he was a civil engineer. He got a job at the city of New Haven. So then we moved to New Haven, and so I went to New Haven, kind of public schools.
Well, I'm going to explore each of those. We were talking at lunch about the Amir Karangi, CEO of The Real Deal. He has a very similar story. Was growing up in Iran, escaped. Roughly the same age, and his I can't remember what episode was he. Probably in the teens, yeah. But listen to that, and I'll email you or text you it after. But they were like literally fleeing. His father fled early, a little bit reverse. His father came first, then him. But it was crazy times, and it's amazing. So much of that Iranian, Persian community has come to the U.S. has done on average, I'm generalizing, it's done so well, in terms of establishing a life and businesses and all that.
Yeah, I
And
mean, maybe the biggest brain drain in history,
yeah,
right? And it's to the
it's
detriment
tragic.
of Iran,
Iran.
but to the benefit of the U.S. in particular,
Yeah.
right? There's so many amazing Iranian Americans that
Agreed.
just run tremendous companies or professors
Yeah.
or
Our real
doctors
estate professionals, real estate
yeah,
owners.
a
Yeah.
lot of real
Well,
estate.
most of my big clients were, like I said, Persian.
Yeah.
All right. So what is going through your head as a 6, 7-year old when your mom says, hey, we're going to go to America. I mean, that had to have just been mind blowing, right?
Yeah, I think, honestly, you know,
It's like a suppressed memory.
there's probably some suppressed memory
Hmm.
there. And I'll say, when I got to the US, and they put me into second grade, I didn't speak a word of
Well,
English.
as I was going to get to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was it like when you landed in Chicago? Like, I mean, Chicago's a big city. September, actually, you're getting some solid weather there, but like, was it like an alien world?
A little bit, but I will tell you, like, I think our first stop was we went to McDonald's. I think on one of
And you
the I
said,
don't know if you've
okay,
done the drive from
yeah,
Chicago to Milwaukee,
I
but
have.
there's almost like rest areas where they have the restaurants. I forget what they
Hmm.
call them in Illinois, but I actually like, I think we went to McDonald's and that was like a big deal. And then 2 days later, they literally stuck me in school.
So you're in Waukesha, which even to this day is probably not necessarily the most diverse community in the world, but
Yeah, I can assure you, in 1985, it was really white.
yeah, it's really white.
In fact, it was me and a Chinese kid were the only diversity.
And they just put you together like, oh, you guys will be friends. You're like, actually, I probably have more in common with the white kids. It's
Well, we would have normal school, and then after school, there was an ESL class for the two of us.
you
Um,
spoke zero
Zero
English.
English. And actually, my mom tells the story of, like after 3, 4, 5 months, I don't remember this. I was in second grade. I would not say a thing at school, like nothing. And the teachers were started calling my uncle and my mom. And so
I
I think
thought you had
they
like a
were really
learning
concerned.
disability or something.
Yeah, they were really
Yeah,
concerned. And then apparently after 6 months, I started talking.
too
And
much.
now my mom says, yeah, you can't shut up now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, as a 7-year-old, I think you're just, I was probably just taking everything in. And I don't, I think we all have trauma. But in the grand scheme of things, like, you know, one, I think of myself as the luckiest person in the world, right? Like, I was born on the other side of the world in the middle of a war. We were one of the few that managed to get out. I have great parents that sort of emphasized education, and gave us tons of opportunities. And then I look at my world and look at what I've been exposed to and who I'm friends with and who my mentors are. And I'll say, my brother was 3 years older. Um, he's actually the respect I have for him is actually greater. He is an amazing physician. He's essentially the world's expert in something called cardio-oncology, which is he's a cardiologist by training, but his specialty is cancer patients and survivors. And it's become actually a very hot field
Hmm.
because before cancer just used to kill patients. And now with all the various treatments, people end up surviving the cancer. But then the number one thing that those treatments, the chemo, radiation, immunotherapies affect is the heart, because those are incredibly toxic
Yeah.
treatments. And so he was at Harvard. He spent actually 7 years here in Nashville at Vanderbilt. And then 3 years ago, UCSF brought him on as sort of the founding chief of cardio oncology. So that's another sort of immigrant story of,
Yeah.
and in his field, he's really at the top of his
You,
field.
you say, oh, I feel like I'm the luckiest guy in the world. And the way you frame it, it sounds like, of course, yeah, that makes sense. But I will say, not to push, I'm not pushing back. It just like a lot of that, I think, is perspective. And um, we talk a lot on the mentality podcast about victim mentality. And you certainly didn't fall into victim mentality. Even at a young age, you could have been like, why am I living in Waukesha? Why am I the only Persian, I can't speak English, woe is me, but it sounds like you didn't really fall into that victim mentality. You had a certain mental toughness. Where do you think that came from?
Yeah, I mean, I think at that age, frankly, I think it's just survival. So I don't.
It's not that deep, right? It's just like I
It's
just
not
got
that
to, yeah,
deep. It's like, and then now I think it gets a lot more complicated when you're an adult. And I've spent a lot of time in the past 10 years thinking about mental fitness. And it's funny actually, like you can have success and more success and more success. That doesn't mean that you're mentally fit. It actually means you have to like work so much harder to be mentally fit as an adult.
What do you mean about mentally? What does that mean? Like define that.
Um, to me, mental fitness is peak performance. It's not sort of falling apart under pressure. It's keeping your cool. It's having clarity of thought.
How do you achieve these things? I mean, is it like a certain amount of sleep, a certain diet? Is it meditation? Is there a practice, like a method to achieve mental fitness?
I think it's a lot of things, but I will tell you, and because it's not one thing. The other thing is you never get there. So like I've realized that essentially until the day I die, just like physical fitness, right? If you don't work out for 2 weeks, you start to lose muscle, you start gaining weight. Mental fitness is exactly the same thing. For me, actually, one of the most impactful things that I've done, there's a program called Positive Intelligence. A guy named Shirzad Chamine. He's actually a Stanford guy. And he's got a program, it's a 6 week kind of intense program. It's mainly on an app where I would say several times in the past decade, um, and look, like, we sit here and we talk about Bridge 33 and the growth and the track record and the access to capital. Um, and a lot of times I will, I'll bring in luck and mentors and which all of those things have been critical, but it's also been 12 years of grinding
Yeah.
and 12 years of pressure and there's been multiple times in the past decade where I felt like I'm almost at, you know, I'm at the edge, like I'm about to sort of, I can't take any more, right? Pressure. And that's when I sort of turned to this positive intelligence Shirzad program. And it's essentially three prongs to his program. The first one is when you do what he calls PQ reps, which is um, it's all this practice where for even as little as 10 seconds, you focus on any one physical sensation. It could be visual. Look at something so intensely that you see colors and shades that you didn't see, or, uh, you know, uh, sense of hearing or the sense of touch or breath work. He actually shows that over 6 weeks, gray matter starts to change. I think that's why meditation is viewed. And
This is
then
this is. Oh no, go ahead. Yeah, please
yeah.
finish. I got a
And then he
follow up
talks
question.
about there's two other prongs to this that we all have these saboteurs. The master saboteur is the judge, and it's we judge ourselves, we judge others, we judge circumstances, and we every person sort of has that. So there's all these methods in terms of like recognizing your saboteurs and then minimizing them. And then there's a sage mentality, which is everything in life, no matter how horrible it is, can be turned into a gift or an opportunity. And it could be the gift of knowledge. Something bad happens, you lose your job, you go through a bad breakup. Um, what knowledge did you gain or could you gain if you were curious and
Mhm.
didn't live in that negativity? Or this bad thing happening is actually a plus because of that knowledge that you've gained.
So it's a very different style or iteration of there's a Navy SEAL Jocko Willing. He does a great video of like good, like no matter how bad, is like good, because it's gonna force you to get better. If
Yes,
if
that's
you
exactly.
if you reframe this bad thing that happened to you, you're like, good, I'm glad that happened to
Yes.
me, and here's why. Because it's gonna force me to work harder, to study harder, to try harder, to get better. And sorry, normally we ask this question at the end of the episode. I'll flip it up here. So we asked resource or something that's helped you. So Sherzad Jameen, was that it?
Shirzad Chamine, and his program is called Positive Intelligence,
Positive intelligence,
and
and it's an app.
it's an app.
Okay.
And it's a 6 week program. And what's really interesting about it is everything I told you, by the way, is just content. And just like what he talks about is we can read about running, we can read about weightlifting, and that's maybe 10% of it. But if you don't actually go to the gym, it means nothing.
Of course.
So much of this, you know, thinking about mental fitness is the practice, right? And so, um, anyway, as I think about mental, and by the way, this is just one tool.
Sure.
There's many, many, many different tools, and I think what I've realized in life is, um, mental fitness starts to matter so much more as you progress in life. And then our job is to basically come up with as many tools and figure out, what works and what doesn't work. But the bottom line is you always sort of have to work at it.
Speaking of a type of mental fitness, you clearly did well in school coming up. You overcame the not speaking English and eventually you mastered that language. Safe to say you were always a pretty disciplined student. Good student.
Yeah, I was a good student, but I will say, my parents also put a lot of pressure on both me and my brother, right, to perform in school.
What was it like if you came home with a B? Was it like you get yelled at and beat? I mean, literally, like when you say pressure,
I
what
wouldn't
define
get
that?
beat, but there was a lot of pressure,
Yeah.
right? There was a sense of, my parents have sacrificed a lot to bring us to this country,
And
which
how dare you not give everything you have to school? Is that the because you see this a lot in immigrant families, right?
absolutely, yeah,
Excellence in
yeah.
a school setting.
Yeah, yeah, it's not unique to my parents, but so much of the success that I have in life is due to that. Now I do think there's other things that are really important, um, and but there was definitely a lot of pressure to perform in school.
Speaking of performance schools, so you get into a phenomenal school, University of Chicago. You said where fun goes to die, but that we were talking about this offline. That's kind of where, from a human standpoint, these are my words. You kind of blossomed. You developed personality.
Yeah,
You went from maybe not Mr. Congeniality in high school, or
yeah,
the most popular, to you felt in college. You really
yeah.
really kind of
I've actually
blossomed.
I've actually thought about this. Super interesting. So I went from Iran, like war zone, to Waukesha, Wisconsin, where I didn't fit in. I mean, I didn't speak the language, right? And then I went to New Haven public
But you did get
schools.
to become a Packers fan,
I
and there's a
did.
lot of value in that.
That was my introduction to America and American sports.
God
I am
bless. You
a
have
Packers,
a
Brewers, Bucks.
cheesehead.
Paul Molitor had his
Yeah.
37 hit streak that was like my introduction to America.
Americana. But you
Um,
go to University of
yeah,
Chicago, and
yeah. And by the way, Wisconsin, amazing people.
it
Then
is.
I went to New Haven public schools, which was a very different situation. And then my parents realized that
When did you move? Oh yeah. So when did you move to New Haven?
87, so I was 9 years old.
87. And New Haven was a public school, is a little tougher
Public
environment than
school,
Waukesha.
really rough environment, completely different from Waukesha, inner city. And then my parents realized there's this really good private school called Hopkins. And so we applied there. Both my brother and I went there. We got in, financial aid kids. But I didn't fit in there either. I was it was kind of rich kids, and it was a great academic school. So I was thinking about this like all my life up through 18.
Y-
I didn't really fit in anywhere.
Yeah.
And then I go to University of Chicago where fun goes to die, and
And you had fun.
I had fun.
I mean, you said earlier, I mean, just to put this, I want to make sure this is framed correctly for the audience. If, literal growing up in a war zone. Well, first of all, growing up with a revolution, then a war zone,
Yeah,
then immigrating to, by every definition, a foreign land, to Waukesha, where you didn't fit in because you didn't speak English, and everybody there didn't look like you, sound like you, act like you. And then after 3-4 years there, I'm not necessarily saying when you finally found your footing, you get moved to New Haven, Connecticut, go to a public school where it was tougher. And it's safe to say by then you were doing, school was a focus because your parents made it a focus,
yeah, oh
maybe.
yeah. New Haven Public Schools, I was like sitting in the front of the class,
You were like,
partly because every
did you ever
every
get like beat up, like a cliche? You ever get beat up for being the nerd, or?
yeah, and not really, but like I would sit
Yeah.
up front, and sometimes there would be like a brawl in the back, and like just people. I mean, this is like in fourth and fifth grade. It was a
Yeah.
rough sort of crowd.
And then your parents say, oh, well, look, we can go to this private school. That's a no brainer, but you go there and it's a bunch of rich kids. You guys aren't rich.
We're not rich. I
Yeah.
assure you of that.
So
Yeah,
how much of that upbringing do you think, kind of made you the person you are today?
yeah. Um, I've actually thought about this. This is very interesting. By the way, all those things, um, it may seem like adversity, but those were gifts, right? I had to learn, and it wasn't like I want to be clear. Even Iran, um, I wouldn't call it trauma, right? It was you don't have a choice. You don't know any better, and so you sort of go through those years not fitting in any one of those places. And then I got to University of Chicago. I mean, the bar was very low, but I was at the top of the social ladder. I was friends with everyone, every frat, 10% Greek scene, but every frat wanted me. I was friends with everyone, the nerds, the jocks, I made tremendous friendships. sort of in college. But I think if I hadn't gone through those experiences that I had, those incredibly diverse situations, um, I would not have been able to learn how to adjust.
Well, you said like the adversity, and then, or I said adversity, you said yes, but they're gifts. There's a fantastic book. I don't know if you ever read it. Malcolm Gladwell, a very famous author, is David versus Goliath. You ever read that book?
Hmm.
It really is, and I remember it changed how I viewed things in general, or things that I felt happened to me, where it was like, well, this, that wasn't really fair. And I've gotten over it, but it wasn't fair, or that I had to deal with this. And then it frames it that oftentimes these things that happen to you, whether it's a disability, a handicapped, adversity, it actually was the greatest gift or greatest strength. I remember there was a story, and they said they were studying very successful people in business, right? And there was this weird. It's like the odds of being dyslexic or something is 1 out of 40, but the top people in business, like 5 out of 10, were dyslexic, and they investigated that and said, well, because reading was challenging, they actually developed. They had to, in order to survive school, they developed the like a photographic memory and then a big personality to get their teachers to like them, to not grade them so hard. And how, if they didn't have this disability as defined dyslexia, but the dyslexia actually was a gift, because it essentially forced them to develop these incredibly valuable skills as a way to compensate. And there was a bunch of different examples. And so if you're listening to this podcast, like David versus Goliath, Malcolm Gladwell, was a phenomenal book. And it's just what you said. It's like, look, all these things, yeah, there's adversity and there's challenges, certainly. And I'm sure when you were going through it, you didn't necessarily have, well, what a gift this is, but it's great when you look back and with perspective, you're like, no, they were gifts. I mean, there's
Yeah, yeah,
adversity that you had to overcome, and they only became a gift because you made it a
yeah.
gift. But
I think adversity is a gift. It forces you to adapt, to learn. Even this, when we think about Bridge 33, right? So there's an argument that the two most influential people, one was Hamid Moghadam and Doug Abbey, right? That those two guys were the inspiration. Big real estate. Hamid is visionary in the real estate world. You know who perhaps the second most influential person was Ralph the tow truck driver on that
yeah,
first deal.
Ralph the tow truck
Yeah.
driver.
The guy who told me about Jimmy Max Roadhouse.
You gotta
And
you
so
gotta give out an award to your most valuable employee
and
every year, called
so
Ralph the tow truck driver
yeah.
award.
I keep in touch with him. And each year, actually, we go back to Stanford Business School and guest lecture the one real estate class. And by the way, class has a guest speaker, and every guest speaker is a huge, alum,
Hmm.
billionaire, CEO. And Andy and I started going back 12 years ago after we bought our first deal, because our class is so different, right? It's two guys sitting in an apartment with no money, but the class is a hit because people relate to it. And so then we've actually brought Ralph back to Stanford Business School. He sits in the back of the class and gets to listen
Oh, so
to the
cool.
story of like Jimmy Max and how he put us in business. That's the first half of the class. And then the second half, we talk about growth and how do you grow a company from, you know, two guys
Two
sitting in a
guys in an
living room
apartment to what
to
it is today.
now 100 something
Let,
employees.
let let's continue the story, because I want to get to that. So you're at University of Chicago, and so people are like, okay, so you majored in real estate.
Yeah.
No, you majored in biological sciences.
Yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah. So, um, I mean, not very smart of me, but I went to the best economics program in the world and I did not take Econ 101. I was hardcore molecular biology, biochemistry. I'm sure it was an immigrant thing. I was going to become a doctor, but really a researcher. And I was going to apply for MD PhD programs. I did 4 years of academic research, pipettes in a lab, never interned for a company, didn't take econ. And I graduated in June of 2000, and I was going to apply for MD PhD programs. Now, I took a year off. I was going to finish up my research. I was going to go to Madagascar for 3 months and study lemurs. It's a PhD project of a very good friend of mine. And I was going to backpack for 4 months in the Middle East. And the idea was during that time, I would apply for my MD PhD programs. I graduated in June of 2000, and I came back home to Connecticut, and I went to the house of one of my really like one of my only friends from high school, Nick Nash, who was a geek as well. I think he won't mind if I call him that. So I went to his house, and what's interesting, Kyle, is at least in my life, um, the smallest things. change the entire direction of your life. And for me, it was, his dad, Avi Nash, who's a great guy, came in and started chatting with me. Now, Avi was a pre-IPO partner at Goldman. And this is back in the day when the research analysts were king on Wall Street. He was like the number one IA ranked chemicals sector, and he was a chemical engineer by background. And he made the argument to me in June of 2000. I've already graduated, that the best science in the future was going to be biotechs and pharmaceuticals. Why don't I go spend 2 years in banking or consulting and then come back for my science degree, and I'll be able to, combine the two. The Human Genome Project had been done, that was private money. And so Avi, in the course of 20 minutes in June of 2000, changed the entire course of my life. I went home. I told my parents that I was going to apply for investment banking jobs. They were confused. They thought I was kidding. And that fall, you could still use the career placement. And I applied, and somehow I ended up getting Morgan Stanley investment banking. And that year, only 2 people from Chicago got an investment banking offer from Morgan Stanley. From Morgan Stanley, the dot-com bubble had kind of burst, and it was just
What? How do you think? Okay, only two from University of Chicago. You're one of two to get that investment banking, but your degree wasn't the economics. It wasn't in the economics school. It wasn't finance. Why do you think they chose you?
I think what happened is and I did this years later when I was on the Chicago recruiting team. They come on campus, they pick 24 resumes, and they do 2 rounds of, 2 people each, and they interview 12 people. And a lot of the resumes look the same. And they saw my resume, not an ounce of evidence that I was remotely interested in econ or business, never worked in a company. I had a high GPA and I had a couple co-authorships. One of them was in Journal of Science, which is somebody knew something about the scientific world. That was kind of a big deal. And then my theory is they said, God, we're gonna die of boredom if we interview 12 econ majors in a row in one day.
This will be fun.
Let's just pick this guy because what the hell, right? And I think I had like a good answer as to, why I wanted to make a shift away from science.
I was going to ask, like, what advice would you have for someone who's applying for a job or looking for a promotion that really on paper they have no business getting, but you got the job that on paper, again, within your field
Yeah,
of biology, you probably could get any job, but you're saying, hey, I want to go work on Wall Street. And in a traditional sense, you had no job. That's really not a job you should have earned, but something, a resume, but something in the interview you did. Have you had time to reflect, and what advice would you have?
yeah. I think for that job there was a realization that even if somebody had a head start, after 2 months when you're working 100 hours a week on Wall Street, it was all gonna it wouldn't matter. And so it's a little bit like the adversity thing, right? Like because I couldn't talk about my internships, because I couldn't talk about econ, because I had to come up with other things, right? That made me stand.
Necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Exactly. That made me stand aside. By the way, I also think that like they really couldn't grill me, right? So that was actually an
You could say,
advantage.
I don't know, and they wouldn't judge you as harshly. They're like,
They
well, yeah, of
wouldn't,
course he wouldn't know, because why would he?
right?
Yeah.
But he's not an idiot,
No,
right?
clearly.
But so I fooled them.
Yeah.
But
Well, part of it is I get nervous being a real estate professional. There's this very age old saying in real estate, A's are doctor, A students, like the really smart people go to be their doctors, right? Or finance. Okay. B's are attorneys and C's go into real estate. And this is why someone like me can be successful, is because there aren't a lot of people like you. I just want to make sure you are an outlier and this isn't a trend. If you're in finance or molecular biology, please stay there. Like, because
yeah.
it's like being in class with a bunch of smart people. If they start grading on a curve, like I'm in trouble.
Hey, Kyle, I
Yeah.
assure you, I'm just a dumb real estate guy.
All right. Fair enough. Fair
I
enough.
assure you.
That's
Trust
why
me.
you went into real estate.
Trust me. I'm never the smartest
All
guy
right.
in the room.
So
I promise you that.
get hired at Morgan Stanley. You just said 100 hours a week. Were you working 100 hours a week?
I actually wasn't. I was, I was one of 2 analysts that got put into this weird group called securitized products. It was a JV between fixed income and investment banking, and I really kind of rose up through the fixed income track, which was a huge blessing, because guess what was happening in the fixed income divisions of all the major investment banks in the early to mid 2000s? It was like the mortgage businesses were
The
printing money,
MBS.
and
What could go wrong?
Yeah, well, I mean, all I can tell you and I did CMBS 2 years, kind of CMBS banking. Then I got promoted to associate.
So you're the guy who helped put together all of the product that brought down the global financial system. Is
Yeah,
that
but it
safe to
wasn't my
say?
fault. It wasn't my fault.
Why? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know what I mean, I was just,
You didn't know,
I
all you
was
knew is somebody was buying it and you guys were making
so
money.
we were making it, and we had to sort of keep making it. But I did 2 years of sort of banking.
What did a day in the life, sorry, time out.
Yeah.
What did the day in the life look like of an investment banker in the fixed income product? Like what were your hours? Did you work like, because in my head, maybe like, there's movies that glorify it. Obviously the Big Short like made it almost funny, but it's like, oh, you're working 105 hours, 7 days a week. Like, is that a real thing? And maybe not in your, but like, is that really the lifestyle?
Yeah, it is. It is in investment banking.
So
It
they get in
is.
at 9 a.m. and they work till 1 a.m.
Yeah,
and
and then usually on the weekends as well. Maybe you have half a day or a full day
why do you
on
think
the
people
weekend.
choose to do that?
Um, I think it's a prestigious job. I think it's a good stepping stone. And look, I actually not so much the hours, right? I mean, could you get the same training with 80 hours? Is that better? Absolutely, right? But I think I actually often advise people like cutting your teeth for 2 years and at an investment bank is actually a fantastic thing. And I'm going to tell you one small story. So I got
Please.
there and this is like my first week on the desk. And my VP asked me to basically like, he marked up some little presentation. And the first year or two, you're essentially a monkey that like
Yeah.
does presentations and models and whatever. So this is
And
like
you're just learning through osmosis. So
the first thing I worked on. And I made the changes, and he said, make the changes, print it up, put it on my seat. And then, he would come in at like 7 and then we would work late. And then, so I did it. I printed it out. I put it in a seat. I came back the next day, like 9 o'clock when I started. And the presentation, he'd ripped it up and it was sitting on my chair. And I come in, this is like my first week. I'm like scared. I'm like, he was in a meeting. I'm like piecing it together. I'm like looking for
oh, you
mistakes.
mean like ripped it up
Yeah, he
physically?
physically ripped
Because
it
we
up.
say, oh yeah, he ripped it up. Like he put a lot of comments.
Oh,
No,
no, no,
you
no,
mean
no.
like
He
ripped
ripped
it.
it up
Okay.
and put it on and I'm like piecing it back together. And I'm like, what did I mess up? Did I misspell something? I'm like going through it. I'm going through it. And I'm like, these were his comments. I
Yeah.
made the comments. And he comes back and I'm like, hey, what? Like, did I mess something up? And then he goes, you see the staple? It's not perpendicular. And my immediate reaction was, man, what a jerk, right? Like, what? The staple is not. But you know what? 25 years later, I'm telling this story. And he's become actually an incredibly close friend of mine and a mentor to me. But he was trying to basically teach me something. That was a teaching moment. And the example is kind of, you can kind of look at it but it was a mindset. It was a mindset of discipline.
Yeah.
It was a mindset of you have tremendous pride for the work that you do. And that staple is just as important as a misspelling or anything else in the presentation.
Oh,
And so again, the story sounds like he's a total jerk, but
but
he
he was
taught me
teaching you something.
something. He taught me something
It made a difference, clearly.
and it made a difference. And then I realized after that that when you pay attention to detail, it's a mindset. It's not like
You received this criticism, which again, you kind of touched on the surface is like silly. Oh my God, what a jerk. Yet you clearly took it to heart and it made you better. But that's not true about everybody. That to a degree is not true about most people. I feel like most people in today's day and age, maybe that's part of it is like so mean, like you're picking on me. And um, why do you think you were able to take that very, very specific criticism and others may not? And you've had the opportunity to manage and coach or employ in a sense many people. What do you think? What is a common thread in the people who can take that type of coaching, as silly as it may seem on the surface, and those who just like, you know what, screw this place. He's a jerk. I don't want to be here. You know.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I'm going
Let me
to
know when you figure it out because
yeah,
it
yeah,
would
yeah,
help me
yeah,
a lot,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
Well, I will tell you, I actually, um, one, I think that specific example, right? He was a great guy, and he was trying to teach me something, so that came with a lot of other positive stuff. But I will talk about, I think, um, maybe the most important trait that I think is necessary for success. That's humility. And probably the best quote that I've heard, and it was actually at a YPO event, and it was a Navy SEAL, sorry, not a Navy SEAL, it was a Blue Angels pilot who ran like 70 missions in Vietnam or something, and he was talking about leadership, and he said, "Humility allows you to be vulnerable, which then allows you to connect and build trust." And that has always stuck in my head as um, like so much of our business, so much of not only professional, personal happiness, right, comes down to connection, comes
Mhm.
down to trust. And so to me, this concept of humility, and I'm kind of stretching a little bit to tie it to that example of the paperclip, but like if you have an ego, you say, "What an asshole.
Mhm.
Who is this guy?" Whereas I'm the 22-year-old that doesn't know anything. And I could have sat there and been offended, or I could have been like, "Oh, this is a learning moment." Right?
And you said this is
And
a learning
it's
moment.
yeah, yeah. So one of the most important, and we hire and fire based on this in our company. We have these four principles, but to me, the most important one is we wake up every day, we crush our ego. And I will actually tie this into Avi Nash. So Avi Nash was my, father's friend who's a mentor,
Your your your
tremendously.
your
This,
your friend's father.
yeah, my friend's
Yeah,
father,
yeah.
who was the reason that I went into finance. Uh, the he spent once he retired, incredibly successful, big, philanthropist, and he spent a couple years thinking about happiness and studying happiness and various forms of tools to think about happiness in life. And his conclusion was that happiness in life comes down to learning how to crush your ego. Which so to me, not only is it a professional thing. Now I haven't had time to think about how crushing your ego leads to happiness in life, but just trust me that Avi Nash spent a few years studying. Um, but to me, both personally and professionally, learning how to crush your ego is the key to success. And the other thing I would say is, as you get more successful, that combination of, success and crushing your ego, the magnitude of the power of that combination actually increases as you um, become more successful.
You were at Morgan Stanley 7 years. Yeah, we already touched on how you left in 2008, but that actually wasn't because the GFC was coming. That's just fortuitous. Did you take time in between leaving Morgan Stanley and going to Stanford? You had mentioned you were doing Madagascar. Was that later?
So Madagascar was after college, and I went to Madagascar and I
So that was before
backpacked.
Morgan
That was
Stanley.
before Morgan Stanley, and then
Okay.
before business school, I spent another 6 months backpacking. And so I was all over Southeast Asia. I was diving. I went to Africa. So twice in my life, I've taken 6 months and have essentially backpacked and stayed in hostels and
It
so
seems
forth.
to have a big impact. You're glad you did it.
Yeah. Oh, those are experiences that, I couldn't do that now. Right.
I was going to say, when are it's going to be tough. You still have a couple years ahead of you before you could do it again.
Yeah. But also like life happens and things change and your circumstances change. And so, yeah, but those are tremendous, tremendous experiences. And I actually went back to Morgan Stanley after, so I graduated in 2010. And so I didn't start Bridge 33. I went
Mhm.
back to Morgan Stanley. And a lot of people said, including myself, I was like, gosh, what's wrong with you? You spent all these years on Wall Street. You go to Stanford Business School. where they pound entrepreneurship and you go back to a big Wall Street bank. But like, it was the best thing I did. I reconnected with a lot of people from Morgan Stanley, my old mentors, my old bosses. And guess who gave me money on that first deal? Whole bunch of people from Morgan Stanley that were
Sure.
my old bosses. So, but also the connectivity, the sort of friendships.
The
Um,
network.
yep.
Before we move on from Morgan Stanley, I do want to come back to not an episode goes by where I sit with someone successful who's achieved a lot within their industry, and I got to bring up the work life balance thing. And so, you're out of University of Chicago, you work at Morgan Stanley 7 years. Like, what did the average day like? Did you have work life balance? If you didn't, why were you willing to sacrifice work life balance as it's kind of traditionally described today for achievement and career accelerated career success? Like, what was your life like? And if you didn't have that balance, why not?
Yeah.
Why was that
I
not
don't,
important to
my
you?
life was never that bad. And I think part of it was being in the fixed income track as opposed to investment banking, much better hours. Fixed income was making way more money. And so I would say the real work life balance really came in when I started Bridge 33. In the
Mhm.
last 12 years, I've worked, I think, in a way that few people can imagine. You can, because you're an entrepreneur and you've built this amazing company. But when it's your own thing and you're an entrepreneur and you're building, so what Andy and I, my partner, have, the way that we have grinded the last 12 years it would have been unimaginable to me when I was at Morgan Stanley. And I worked hard at Morgan Stanley,
But
but it's just different.
the intensity, just the commitment of time, simply
Yeah,
put, of building your own business is
yeah,
hardcore.
yeah.
And it's even harder. Just when you have kids, but married and then kids, that's the biggest challenge. We were talking about it earlier. And you just got married.
I just got
Congratulations.
married last
Yeah,
weekend. Yeah,
is this a public, we
yeah.
announced
Thank
this?
you. Yeah, I mean, it's
You spent like an hour telling me how wonderful your wife was,
she's
and
absolutely
hours and
fantastic. Yeah,
hours you wouldn't shut up about her, right? Yeah. See how I got.
she's
I've been married
absolutely.
a long
Thank
time,
you.
dude. I'm not
Thank
new to
you.
this
No,
game.
she's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
And it was a very sort of it was a sort of an unofficial. We just had our parents and our siblings. In a year and a half or so, we want to do a really nice ceremony with sort of all our friends and
I'll
mentors.
keep
And
an eye out for the invite.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so, w- and I feel like I'm going to generalize maybe more of a male perspective sometimes. Was there in your Morgan Stanley and then, obviously B school and then starting Bridge 33 in 12 years of what appears, a grind, were you one of those, kind of classic guys like, hey, I don't have, like, I'm focused on my career. I'll do the family thing later. Was that a conscious kind of thing that was circling around? Was your mom like, when are you getting married? Or
Y-
was it just didn't happen?
Yeah, I think for me, so I'm 46, and I think.
You're good looking
Well,
46. You
thank you
don't look
very much,
46.
Kyle. I'll say the same about you. You're a good-looking 40,
42. Yeah. All
42.
right. See,
See, yeah,
I don't
we're
care what
both
Troy Market,
good-looking
I don't
guys,
care what
man.
Troy Market said about you. You're a good
Yeah.
guy. But,
Yeah, so I think for much of my life I dated great women, but at the end of the day I always prioritized things that I wanted to get out of life. And so
what were those things
I wanted to live in Europe. And so for 2 years I was an expat with Morgan Stanley in '06 and '07
in London?
in London,
Yeah.
doing business in the Middle East. I then wanted to go to business school. Guess what? Business school is not compatible with settling down and getting married. The number of relationships that don't make it through business school, just the nature of that. Um, and I then started a company, and like I said, the last 12 years. Let me put this, just let me say this clearly. Um, the intensity of the past 12 years, if I had a wife and kids, I would have been a terrible husband. I would have been a terrible father. I've been on the road for much of the past decade of my life. Even this week, since Saturday, I've been in 5 different cities. by the time I got to Nashville. And so, um,
Or if you had a wife and kids, to dedicate to fulfill your commitments there, Bridge 33 might not be as far along as it is, or it might not be at all.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, Andy and I ran the company for the first 4 years out of a two-bedroom apartment. And by the fourth year, we had 6 employees and they had keys to our two-bedroom apartment.
It keeps facilities costs down.
Yeah. No, no,
Yeah,
I mean, we
appreciate that.
completely bootstrapped this company. And
Mm.
because we were vertically integrated, not that we were making fees off, I mean, we were buying one-off deals, but like whatever we would make, we would put back into the company and into hiring people and into building an operating platform.
I'm picking up something from you. It's like there's like a message, there's an energy, like a seriousness. You've said it a couple times, like the last 12 years, the grind, like you're like even your face changed. Like it's almost like the odd no, it's like I'm trying to you would look at this camera, like talk to the audience, talk to the audience, talk to anyone who considers themselves an entrepreneur or wants to be an entrepreneur and start their own business. And I even talk to the real estate, because I always tell real estate agents, you are your own business, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
talk to them and tell them like what they're signing up to do. Like, because again, I'm feeling it like, whoa, man, it must have been really hard, like and intense and a huge commitment, a huge sacrifice, possibly even greater than you thought. Like when you started a business, or looking back now, when someone is thinking about starting a business, what are they getting into? And what can you tell them? Like, hey, just heads up, this is what you should
Yeah. I
expect.
mean, it's all encompassing. It, I mean, the number of dreams I've had about work over the past 12 years. And um, it is just really, really intense in sort of every way. And that's actually, I look back and I look at the number of times that we got lucky. That's the other thing. A lot of people, like when they're successful, they think it's them, it's all them. And of course, you have to grind. Of course, you have to work hard. Of course, you have to be really good. Of course, you have to be skilled, but you also have to get lucky. 'Cause there's a lot of people that have all that and don't get lucky, right? So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. But I think being an entrepreneur is not for everyone, right? And it comes with a tremendous amount of sacrifice. And yeah, so you have to love it. You have to love what you do. Now, let me just balance out like why I grind. I love what I do. And I'll go back to I'm the luckiest person in the world. I love what I do. I love real estate. I love retail. I love our tenants, even when they're super difficult to negotiate with, and all the big national tenants that, give you a hard time. Um, I love the relationships that we've built. If you said, "Hey, Jahan, let's go look at this shopping center in Nashville," I'd go, "Let's go. Let's go. We'll, talk about the anchors. We'll talk about the visibility." So I love what I do. And then building this company out of nothing has been a tremendously rewarding,
Fulfilling.
fulfilling thing. And and I'll just, let me just say a couple of things too about um I think we live in the greatest country in the world. I remember when we came to America, my mom would always say, "This is the land of opportunity." And I just kind of took that for granted. I mean, I didn't really know what it meant. I was a kid. But I truly believe only in this country can you have someone, come to America with no money, we didn't speak the language, and the opportunities that this country gives you, right? And of course, you need to work hard. Of course, you need to be lucky. Of course, you need to have great parents. All of that, all of those things. All those things help, I should say. So that's one point that I would make, and I know our country has a lot of problems, but this is still the greatest country in the world. Um,
Pretty low bar out there.
yeah, I mean, I just think if you haven't, you know, lived abroad, there's just a lot of countries have a lot of issues out there. But certainly, I don't think there's any other country in the world where the opportunity that people have. And I know we have a lot of issues. I know there's, inequality. I know there's a lot of issues. But at the same time, I think what this country offers in terms of opportunity for those that want it, for those that seek it, um, we're second to none.
You mentioned, I agree. And I don't have your perspective having actually lived in another country. So, I feel like you saying that probably is even more meaningful. Very much an American dream, immigrant success story.
Yeah. But I'm gonna pause there for a second, Kyle, because um, I, what you have achieved, and I'm not trying to blow smoke up your ass. What you have achieved, you come from a family where people are really successful in their own right and celebrities, and you have grinded to build something amazing. That actually, I think, is more impressive than if you have nothing, and because you don't really have a choice, right? And you have a sort of chip on the shoulder. So I think for I think for all of us, all of us have challenges. All of us have adversity, and all of us are dealt different hands. The real happiness in life is what do you do with it? Whatever hand you're dealt, right? And I could walk out of here and get hit by a car, and my life could change. What do I do at that point with the hand that I got dealt when I walked out of this building? S-
Well, you've done a great job working with the hands you were dealt, whether they're really hard or you think they're all blessings. So again, a lot of that, to your point, has to do with perspective. I wrote down you when we were talking about being an entrepreneur and starting a company. You had said the word sacrifice to achieve something, and what were tangibly the things you set out to achieve when you started Bridge 33? You and your co-founder, but if I may, just you.
Yeah.
Um, was it a valuation? Was it a certain net worth? Was it what were some tangible goals that you set out to achieve? And I have to assume some, maybe all, but some of them you hit. What happened when you hit those? When you football analogy here, when you got to the end zone, was it as satisfying and fulfilling and rewarding, or did you just move the goalposts?
Yeah. So let me answer the second one. You just moved the goalpost,
Mhm.
right? And in fact, the more you achieve, I think the more you want to achieve. But I will tell you, and I say this for both Andy and myself, money was never the big motivator for us. I think for me, I was heavily inspired by Hamid and Doug, who I just look up to so much. And then all these mentors, former colleagues, pretty much every important relationship in my life. I have 300 something investors. Pretty much every important relationship in my life is an investor. Okay. So I'm all in. I'm all in. There's nothing in the world that means more to me than those relationships. So to me, I think there's a few different things that really motivate me. One is to being inspired by Hamid and Doug and what they've built. I often think about it as, hey, how can I follow in their footsteps? How can I make them, because they're stakeholders in the company, how can I make them proud? And
Mm.
all these investors that trust us, and the fiduciary responsibility that I feel is tremendous for our investors.
Is it okay? I put that maybe in the bucket of expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of my friends, really close friends, is also a mentor, kind of jokes that I need to go see a shrink about why I want all these investors to be so proud of me. That's the key. That to me is more important.
Affirmation.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, in my free time, I'll go see a shrink and try to unpack that.
Well,
But
when you manage 600, 700 real estate brokers, you just become a shrink. I
yeah,
didn't even
oh,
sign
it'll
up
come
for
to
it.
you.
I
Yeah,
just had to
exactly.
develop
Yeah,
the skills. No, but
yeah.
uh,
Um, so I think that's a piece of it. I think um, building a really great company with a great culture, that's rewarding. It's not easy, especially when companies go through periods of fast growth. There's a lot of times when we're saying, "Oh, wait a minute, what's happening to our culture?" And it's just it's kind of like the mental fitness. You got to constantly work at it. It never goes away, right? So
Culture is like a sandcastle, man. You have to basically tend to it at all times because the wind and the water will never stop coming. It's never going to stop kind of eroding it. To eventually, it almost looks like it was never there. You have to consistently just keep putting it back together.
totally,
Yeah.
totally. And again, there's many tools that we can use to do that. And then being relevant. I think you know, having pride of ownership. We take tremendous pride in our properties. I will actually tell you, like um, I visit our properties. I dig into the financials, we have a team of over 100 people in the company, right? And I have tremendous sort of people that run business units, and we're constantly recruiting really good people. And by the way, it's been fun because what I've realized is a lot of retail real estate companies are shrinking,
Yeah.
right? And so we're one of the few companies that has had tremendous. We're probably the fastest growing retail landlord in the country, but also we have this culture of some of the things we've talked about, right? The crush your ego, like the I can tell you this, Kyle. I Every day I learn 20 things a day, minimum,
Hmm.
minimum. And I tell people the day that I stop learning is the day that I'm gonna hang it up and I'm done. The day that I figure out retail, I say this to investors, you should take your money and run away, right? Because retail is constantly evolving, and we're all students. I'm a student of retail every day.
Was there ever a moment where you felt like Bridge was going to fail? Or you had
Um,
tremendous fear, like, oh my gosh, I don't know if we'll make it out of this. And how did you mentally handle that?
so I would say for the first 7 years, I thought Bridge 33 could fail at any point. It wasn't until 7 or 8 years in that I said, okay. In fact, people would kind of laugh because I'd say, oh, we're like a real company, right? And that was 8 years in. We probably had like 50 people. We were in 20 states. I think that a little bit of paranoia, a little bit of, um, what do I not know? Um, so, and I can tell you, like, all along the way, right? Um, Especially in the first sort of 3, 4 years, if we did one bad deal, that was it. And so one lease,
There's not a lot of margin of error.
one. Our third deal ever was a $24 million deal in Vegas called Renaissance West, which was a massive. We did a $3 and a $6 million deal.
You probably had a high resting heart rate during that escrow.
Oh, I probably lost 3 weeks
I was
off my
going to
life.
say to go from what was your first deal, 2.7, then 6, then what,
24
24?
on an auction platform.
Or you got to put 10% up hard. And
10%,
yeah.
which I didn't have. One of our investors put in that money.
Yeah.
And then I was like dialing for dollars with no track record. No, I actually look back these days to some of those days, and I actually remember talking to Hamid about it, and I was like, it's a couple years later. I'm like, Hamid, like, what? Why did you let me do this?
Insane.
And his response was, hey, I knew exactly what you were doing, but to be an entrepreneur at that stage, that's what you had to do, and you had to be a little crazy. And
Ignorance is bliss sometimes, you know?
yes, and absolutely. So like, if you sit there as an entrepreneur and calculate everything. In fact, something else that Hamid told me before I started the company was he said the best advice I can give you is trust your gut. You're going to have to constantly make decisions with imperfect information. That's what you're signing up for, and you listen to people and you ask questions and you do your work. And at the end of the day, trust your gut. And that's probably the best advice that I've received. And he said that to me before we started the company.
Okay. In addition to trusting your gut, a lot of work goes into it, right? A lot of we talked about, especially the last 12 years for you. In my line of work, I don't think there's ever been an agent who didn't start here. It's like, I want to be the number. I want to make 10 million a year. Like, I'll do whatever it takes. And they do for a period of time, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, but 99 out of 100, 999 out of 1,000 kind of gas out. and it doesn't mean that they don't go on to have, nice little careers, good careers, but never kind of as big as they maybe talked about when like, in your space, I want to, for those listening, I want to start a real estate investment platform, whether retail, multifamily, product type, doesn't matter, and some of them might actually take the steps to do it, but most people haven't been able to keep up the pace you have for 12 years to make it work. Like, why do you think so many people just don't like they don't have that stamina. They gas out or like everybody wants to be I don't think I've ever met someone who's like if I said, "Hey, do you want to be successful?" No one's like, "Yeah, you know what? Not really. I don't want to." Everybody's like, "Yeah, I do." And in their hearts, I know they do. I really believe them because I
Yeah.
think they believe themselves, but something happens and they run out of steam. Like why do you think people can't find the stamina and the gas, the fuel that you did to push as hard as you needed to for 7, 8 years until you were
Yeah.
like, "Hey, this is a real company."
So I'd say the most important factor in that is having a good partner. So my partner, Andy, we have very complementary skill sets. Um,
Well, you were telling me you're the handsome face, he's the brain.
I'm
No, I'm just
yeah. I often tell people I'm not just a pretty face, Kyle.
uh,
All right.
how would you say when it comes to you and Andy, like how would you or you know, when you said complementary skill sets, what would you say, you guys would agree that you bring to the table versus what he brings to the
Yeah, so
table?
I'm kind of the face. I raise the capital. I oversee investments, deal making, tenants, relationships. But what often people don't realize, or maybe don't think about, or give enough credit to, is there is a whole. I can only do this because Andy literally takes anything and everything off of my plate that then frees me up to go do what I do. And so let me say this with zero doubt. If I didn't have the best partner imaginable, we're talking about full trust. Like he's got full control over my bank accounts, my personal taxes, everything. Any issue in the company that requires the senior most level attention that I don't have time for, he handles, right? And there's full trust there. And so we each, I think, the complementary skill set that exists with my partner, Andy, is amazing. And there's no way this company would be where it was. It also would be, I can't imagine how lonely it would be, right? And how, um, yes, this has been a grind, but this has also been the funnest thing I've ever done in my life. And I've had a lot of fun, I think, in my life, whether it was traveling, backpacking.
Ayahuasca
I
journeys with
can
Aaron
go
Rodgers
into
in Costa
yeah.
Rica,
Just to be clear, I did not do ayahuasca with Aaron Rodgers in Costa Rica. Just to be clear, um,
but you did do ayahuasca.
I
Um, so
maybe
so your skill set and Andy's skill set complement each other, and together over the last 12, you guys have done great things. Your
yeah
biggest retail buyer, I mean, huge platform, billions of AUM. I asked earlier about the end zone. What you set out to do. Take a look at where Bridge 33 is today. How are you defining success over the next 5 or 10 years? Like,
yeah I
talk
would
to the audience. Like, we're right, what is it? Early April 2025. Let's come back in 2030. Like, where do you want to be? Like, just lay out the vision for the company.
yeah. So we used to say we want to be the best owner, operator, investor of open air retail in the country, and there's some truth to that. But then we actually sat about 6 or 9 months ago with my management team, and I have a tremendous management team. And we actually talked about what is it that distinguishes Bridge 33? What's our competitive advantage? And we actually changed our mission. So now our mission is to create value and build relationships where others don't. And you can tie that back to building a relationship with unbelievable mentors like Hamid and Doug, building a relationship with Ralph, the tow truck driver, and every step of the way, right? One of the best deals we've ever done. It was a legacy deal. We don't really do office anymore. We bought the tallest Class A office building in West Virginia, and people made fun of us. They said we bought it through a foreclosure auction. It was $62 a foot. It was the best building in the state capital. It's been one of the best, not only investments, but also I just came from West Virginia. I go to that community. We built some tremendous relationships with tremendous people, powerful people. I mean, people that work with the senators and the mayor of Charleston and the top business people in West Virginia, right? And so and a lot of people said, "Whoa, you're buying an office building in West Virginia." And but then it goes back to we create value and build relationships where others don't. Now that was a different time. We wouldn't buy an office tower in West Virginia today because we have clarity around where we're going as a company. But the key driving mission is building relationships, creating value where others don't. Part of the reason why when you look at our portfolio, 15 million square feet, we own nothing in Florida because what we have found is a lot of capital is going, and it's not that I, don't like the population inflow into Florida, but we can buy at the same center for half the price per square foot in maybe a Midwest market with
Mhm.
tenants even having better sales and better occupancy costs in a market where nobody's going to build another retail center. But everyone's going to Florida. So we like to be a little contrarian. So that's our mission, but we have a lot of clarity. We do want to be the best owner operator. Scale does matter. We have, for example, 30 locations with TJX right now, the best soft goods retailer in the country, a tremendous retailer. That's a tremendous relationship for us. And those are, we talk a lot about relationships and the importance of those relationships. So um, at the same time, I go back to one of the questions that Hamid would always ask from year one. He would send me random texts that would be, Hobbesian choice, AUM or ROI. And the first time he sent that to me 11, 12 years ago, I was like, oh, Hamid is asking me this, and I spent like a day thinking about each perspective. Like, these are the pros and cons of AUM. These are the pros and cons of ROI. And I was like, had prepped something. And then he like smacks me and he's like, it's ROI, you idiot. Like, once you go AUM, you can never go back. Right. And so, so that's why our mission goes back to creating value
Mhm.
and building relationships where others don't, as opposed to just being, the biggest buyer or the biggest,
Well, look, creating value in real estate that's how you find success. And the way I have found, in my humble opinion, you create value is through the relationship. We are
absolutely.
talking about it earlier. It's such a cool industry because unregulated in the sense, if you put in the effort and the ingenuity and connect with someone who tells you something that no one else knows, hey, this tenant would love to be at that corner. That relationship that you have created the value being, I know that tenant would like to be at this corner. And if I can purchase an asset, especially if it has a vacancy that fit, I can create that value. So
Yeah.
it's a good fit for what you're doing.
It's the ultimate people
It
business.
is.
And I do think this is broader than real estate, but it's particularly relevant to real estate. People want to do business with people they like and they trust. So then we go back to humility allows you to be vulnerable, which allows you to connect and build trust. So these are some of the themes that uh, I think are critical not only to the success of the company, but it's also when you grind and build your company the way that Andy and I have done, we get to choose who we want to work with. We get to choose who we hire. We get to choose who we take money from, or who we lease space to, or who we borrow from. And I think for us, it comes down to we want to work with people we like and we trust.
Last question. Someone wants to start a company. Could be a real estate company, could be anything. Doesn't have capital, connections, or like a clear path to doing it. What advice would you have?
I mean, that was our situation, right? We didn't have capital.
You weren't
We
from the real estate business.
Andy was a medical doctor, career switch into banking, and I was a CMBS guy, but I'd never sat in a like as an analyst in private equity, never bought real estate. That's why the Bridge 33 story is so improbable, and so much gratitude. Um, and really would say, I mean, look, the obvious things, right? Like if you don't work hard, if you are not smart, if you're um, not trying to build relationships, but those are obvious. But I would say the two most impactful things for me that with full conviction, we would not be nearly as successful as we've been. One is having a good partner, and the other one is having the right mentors.
How do you find a mentor if it hasn't just happened naturally?
Um, I think it's being humble, listening. A lot of people think networking is about talking, but it's listening, it's connecting. Um, and um, on that first deal, um, I forget if I said this in the beginning of the podcast or not, but I asked a few people afterwards. I'm like, "Why did you give us money?" Right? We had no track record. We didn't know what we were doing.
I think you did. You said that, well, we knew you weren't going to steal our money,
Yes,
right?
right,
We trusted you and you had one shot.
yeah. So, by the way, all those people were mentors, right? So sort of think about what kind of trust you build with people, what kind of relationships you build with people. And then I will say the one nice thing about this is um, once you become, once you gain traction and you start getting really terrific people behind you, then other terrific people want to be in the same club
It snowballs a little.
and it snowballs.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that factor too. So hopefully that is a bit of encouragement in terms of it's hard, but once you start becoming successful, I think uh, the other thing I would say is a lot of people. A few years ago, I read this book about the Wright brothers, and it's just an unbelievable story. These were high school educated kids out of Dayton, Ohio, that basically invented flying. They weren't PhDs in aeronautical physics or whatever, right? And the biggest takeaway, actually, the one year I had everybody in the much smaller company at the time, everybody read the book. But my takeaway is anyone can do anything, but most people don't even try.
Why do you think that is? Fear.
I think it's fear. I think it's um it's lack of imagination. And I don't say this in a um we've obviously started from nothing and have had some success and a
You're
lot of
not saying from a
things.
judgmental way.
Yeah, I'm not saying
Yeah,
it from a
I
judgmental way.
understand.
I don't think I could have imagined, right? I got this inspiration from Hamid and Doug. I literally thought this was going to be a pie in the sky 2 year experiment. I actually thought, I was like, oh, if we buy a deal, because I had zero experience, I thought the bricks were going to fall down. Like I lost sleep over the fact that, hey, we're buying this strip center. What if the bricks fall down? Or what if I didn't really totally understand title insurance, and we didn't have money for lawyers and all. Remember, this is total bootstrap. And I thought, oh, what if we missed something in title and I just lost 2.75 million? Like I didn't fully grasp it. I knew
Mhm.
there was something called title insurance, but we just didn't. And so like even for us, like I never could have imagined um if he told me to fantasize, I could not have come up with probably 20%. And by the way, I think we're still in the second or third inning. I mean, we're very early. Like we're learning, we're growing, and the other change that's happened is we've hired so many great people that actually are experienced in leasing, that actually are experienced in property management. So like my job
Almost gets easier, right?
is to learn it. Well, it's to let them lead
And you learn from them.
and I learn from them.
Yeah. It's interesting. You work the hardest ever those first couple of years for the least amount of money, right? And so on the surface, it's like why people work. You're like, well, that must have been terrible. And yet the further you or me or anyone gets away from that period of time, the more like nostalgic and more we find for that. Like, man, remember the good old days? Like the good old days, we stayed in a 2-bedroom apartment and had 6 people. And what do you mean the good old days? Like, I don't know. It was just magical. But at the time, it's like, you're working the hardest. You have the most amount of fear. You have the least amount of capital. You know, you know the least. You know, you make the least amount of money. It's crazy how that happens. You know, as I always tell people, you never know when. The thing with the good old days, you never know when you're in them.
Yeah.
You know, but this has been.
Yeah.
This has been.
It's all a gift.
Yeah.
It's every day. And I know that it sounds almost like false positivity, but like, you know, the hardest things that give, and I've had tons of anxiety. We've talked about this a little bit. I have performance anxiety. Public speaking is, to this day, gives me so much anxiety, and I have to do it all the time. I have to do it all the time now. And I sometimes think about, do I say no? But I'm like, no, I have to get better at it. And I sort of torture myself. But that's how you grow, right? And then you can look back and you say, it's a gift.
It's so easy once you figure it out. You got half of it is tell a joke because the whole key is getting the crowd behind you. So start by telling a joke.
I should have been funnier today.
No, dude, this crowd. And then the other half, if you don't want to tell a joke, is actually show you're vulnerable. I walk up, I say, guys, I'm going to start. I'm going to tell you, I am so nervous right now. My hands are shaking. I didn't sleep last night. This is so intimidating. So if you just bear with me, I'm going to do the best I can. And almost everybody's like, nah, we got you, bro. Like, it's so easy. And both things can be it's you could actually be funny and have a good joke, and you could be scared out of your mind and shaken because, like, man, you know, going up and talking in front of people, it's not easy. But I mean, you do a great job, Jahan. This has been great. So many nuggets from this. This is the most amount of notes I've ever wrote. Zach, here we go. For everyone listening, if you'd like to learn more about Jahan, I'm going to add in the retail properties they look to acquire and all the exciting things happening at Bridge 33. Visit bridge33capital.com and be sure to follow both Jahan and Bridge 33 on LinkedIn. That's the best way to
probably
send them a DM, ask for some mentorship. And if you got value from this episode, don't forget to follow me on X, Instagram, LinkedIn. Just search Kyle Matthews CEO. Check out more episodes of the Matthews Mentality podcast wherever you listen. Jahan, this has been awesome. I'm so glad we got it done.
Yeah,
we've been working on this. You're like the hardest guest we've ever had to get locked down. You know, it was easier. I could get Donald Trump on this show faster than I could get you. You know, but I'm really appreciative you made it to town. A couple of tornado warnings thrown in, but enjoy Nashville this weekend with your new bride, and I look forward to selling some deals to you, but selling some deals for you.
Let's do some business together. And Kyle, it's been such a pleasure. What you've done with this podcast, as I said, amazing. I can't wait to see where this goes in the next 1, 2, 3 years.
I'm excited. I'll come visit you in Seattle, right?
Absolutely, this summer.
See ya.
Thanks, Kyle.